Well, some people are still coming in, but I'd like to get started. We do have a great lineup of speakers today. I'm Laura Carpenter, the Executive Director of Identity. I use they, them, and she, her pronouns, and I'd love to welcome you to Transgender Day of Visibility. As we are telling where we are on our lands, I would like to acknowledge verbally that I am on Dana-Ina land, and Identity serves across this unceded land of the Indigenous peoples of Alaska. We are also part of the United States, which was built on stolen land with stolen labor. That debt has not been repaid. I am grateful for those who came before us, those that are still here, and those working toward the next 10,000 years. May this acknowledgement also be a step toward liberation for all peoples. Identity has many wonderful programs for the trans community of Alaska. The Gender Expansive Community of Anchorage is a peer support group that meets bi-weekly. We have youth and elder programs. Next week, you can stream Mama Gloria, a documentary about Black trans icon Gloria Allen. And on April 3rd is a Q&A with Gloria, the filmmaker, and an Identity board member, Will Bean, who is actually also going to be speaking later today. Also, I know a lot of people are curious what Anchorage Pride will be like this year. It is going to be June 19th through 26th, virtual and in-person events. And some very exciting news, Identity will open a health clinic next month to provide gender-affirming care. I am so grateful for all the support of this event. 70 tickets were sold, which is just amazing to me. And I really appreciate all you being here and for everyone that donated as part of that ticket. And in particular, I would like to extend my gratitude to the Planning Steering Committee of Skylar Arendt, Oliver Smith, Brooks Banker, Will Bean, and Charlie Mills. Thank you all so much. Transgender Day of Visibility event is sponsored by Full Spectrum Health and Planned Parenthood of Northwest and Hawaii. As for part of Transgender Day of Visibility, I would also like to share a story about myself. I am a genderqueer lesbian. I use they, them, and she, her pronouns, as I mentioned. I am also a runner. And there is a lot of conversation nationally right now about transgender athletes. So I would like to take you back to the 1990s when I was a high school track and field athlete. It is the end of track season on a dirt track after school in the hot Southern California sun. We're practicing for the big final races of the year, and there's only a few of us on the track. My signature race is the 800 meters, which is 2 laps around the track. Not quite a sprint, not quite a distance race. I was non-binary even then and didn't know it. Today, I'm going to simulate the race by running 1 lap at race pace, rest, and then run the next lap at race pace. Short and sweet. So about 65 seconds for the first lap, rest, and then 66 seconds. I have that end of season jittery nerves. So I start my first 400 meters. I can literally say, eat my dust, because it's a dirt track and my spike shoes are flinging dirt up behind me. First 100 meters, second, third, shoulders back, on my toes. This is what I've been training for. I'm coming at the end of the first lap. My legs are burning, my lungs are burning. The finish is right there. My coach is standing there with a stopwatch. And I'm hoping she's gonna call out my time with around 65 seconds, but instead she yells, "Keep going." Wait, what? Do another 200. Oh no, I wanna stop. My body is ready to stop running. But this is Coach Ross. She's training for the Atlanta Olympics. She introduced me to Florence Griffith Joyner, one of the best athletes of all time. And I'm one of the only people on the track right now, so everyone can see what I'm doing. I don't want to disappoint any of them, but oh, my body does not want to run anymore. Another 200 meters. That's half a lap. 1 curve, 1 straightaway. I keep going. I run as hard as I can. I finished the 600, which I thought was going to be a 400. I do it. Honestly, I don't even know how the race went that weekend, but I think about that workout all the time because I learned that day how to keep going. And sometimes you think you're done with something and you're not. Like right now, there are vaccines out there, but also another curve and another straightaway to go. But we can do this. We've got this. One foot and then another. Thank you so much for listening. I'm so glad you're here. I would now like to introduce you to your host for this evening, the wonderful, the fabulous, Golden Delicious.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much, Laura, for that wonderful intro. And I just want to echo my thanks for the wonderful planning committee. It's been awesome to be able to connect with folks during these trying times, especially within the queer and gender variant LGBTQ2+ community. Thank you so much for providing space for me to be hosting tonight. I am Golden Delicious. I also go by Goldie. I use she, her pronouns in drag, which is what this is to me, currently presenting my drag persona. But I am a genderqueer identified queer individual, also using any pronouns with positive intention outside of drag. I live on the unceded territory in the Upper Takatnu area of on Danaina lands, and again, so thankful. It's such an honor to have been asked and again provided a space to host tonight. Transgender Day of Visibility is such an important celebration of people who have led our community into the rights and into the spaces and into the visibility that we all have benefited from as an LGBTQ+2+ community. And so tonight I participate in honoring the gender variant, trans, non-binary, genderqueer, agender, etc. siblings, and all of you in this room. Thank you so much for being here. Drag for me is, and it's not everyone's story, but drag for me has definitely been my own personal journey and way of celebrating my gender, celebrating and having an opportunity to show my community and the world a part of myself, my femininity. I sometimes even say the female that lives within me, because I truly feel I have a large part, and she desires to explore gender in a performative way. Gender for me is a performance on a day-to-day basis, but more so when I get to make face, put on a silly little hat, and celebrate events such as this with my community in activism and advocacy. And I'm just so honored again, so honored, I'll keep saying it, to be given this space tonight and to be working alongside such wonderful people. We have a wonderful group of speakers tonight, storytellers, here to give their unique experience in their trans identity and their gender journey. And I'm just so thankful. So we're gonna get started. And again, this is going to be live on YouTube right now. Hello, YouTube. Thanks for joining in, and thank you all for here on the Zoom call. I'm going to be placing the speakers' bios in the chat, as well as going ahead and introducing them by saying their bio out loud. So our first speaker, Liz, lives and works on the lower Tanana, sorry, my bad, Tanana Dene Athabascan people with her partner and their 5 cats. And in 2018, Liz, along with Kathy Otterson, became the first openly trans elected officials in Alaska. Please give your undivided attention to Liz.
Okay. Yeah, I'm really excited to speak with everyone. I think a lot of people that have lived a transgender experience, it can be pretty painful. And I think that during COVID, you're left with a lot of your past. And I'm going to talk about some of it today because I think when it only lives inside of you, it can be toxic. But when you kind of let go of that, it can be really freeing. So for me, I came out first to my ex-wife in exactly about 6 years ago in 2015. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my experience getting to that point, and then kind of go on to a little further after that. So sorry if I'm a little nervous. I think if I were to have a biography, I would want to call it "My Life Was Meant to Be Filled with as Much Irony as Possible." I was born in 1977 in the state of Minnesota to two really young, really Christian parents. Right away, kind of set up with gender boundaries that were very rigid. And there's a lot of that I can't really quite access all the memories. I remember, for whatever reason, my dad would pray over me in tongues all the time. And for some reason, I remember he'd always say this word, "Shadabakante, Shadabakante." So I don't know what he thought that word meant, but I didn't really know either. Elementary school was tough. I got bullied a lot. I remember on the playground, the game to play for people assigned male was Smear the Queer. And for some reason, I got the football a lot and ran for my life. So that's kind of all before I really had any awareness of what was going on with my gender. I just didn't fit in. I remember in 9th grade, my parents, we took a trip to Colorado to visit some family. And that was the first time in my life that I saw a visible trans person. And I remember my family members speaking very poorly about that person. But for me, it was like a realization that, like, you know, people like this do exist. This is before the internet. So in high school, spent a good amount of time in the library, keyword searching. Back then, the term I was looking for was transsexual. So checked out everything I could at the Dakota County Library in Apple Valley and Burnsville, Minnesota, just trying to figure things out. In 1995, I went to community college, and that was the first time that I had access to the internet in my life. So I think if I look back, it's hard to calculate how much time I spent online looking at translated content, thousands of hours for sure. But it was in 2015, after all that research, and is when it came out. And I think leading up to that, I kind of realized that I was making a choice not to come out. In 2008 or 9, in Minnesota, I saw a counselor at a gender program at the University of Minnesota. And, you know, this was something that I definitely could have gone forward, but I had, you know, a wife at the time and parents and a lot of baggage that made that really scary for me. So I didn't pursue it at that time. In 2010, I moved to where I live now in Fairbanks, and it was pretty miserable when I first got up here. Sometimes when you're trans, you'll do something to distract you, and it was a change of place, but, you know, still left with how I felt about myself and felt invisible. Shortly after that, I found my last distraction, I guess, which was I got super into road biking, cross-country skiing, and plant-based sports nutrition. There are podcasts about that, and I would spend all kinds of time listening to that. And in the end, what really happened is it caused me to develop like an eating disorder mixed with exercise that wasn't healthy, but it was the only thing I could do to kind of keep my gender at bay. In 2013, I saw a counselor for a few times, and she basically agreed with me and said, yeah, you're trans, you should probably come out, it would make your life better. And I think I agreed with her, but I wasn't ready yet. So I think a lot of times I think about gender, and I think trans people, you have a way that you experience kind of everything that's out there, and not all at the same time. I think for me at that time, I kind of tried to get as close to the line as I could without actually coming out or kind of going over that line. I was like, well, I'm road biking all the time. Well, I might as well start shaving my legs. And then I was like, well, I'm pretty skinny. So I started wearing skinny jeans, Toms, and V-neck shirts, which is not too dissimilar to what I do now. But it was, I was just left with this anxiety all the time about my gender. And I think it might have had something to do with living in Alaska, where we have these seasons that are so just distinct, so it was March, it was warm, and the sun was really coming back, and you feel it. This is another year, and this is another year not living how I want to live. I came out in about as awkward way as you could in the bedroom with my ex-wife and just blurted out, I'm a girl. And that just kind of was my moment of breaking free. We're not together now, but I'm so thankful for her in that moment of just being someone there to listen and not to judge. That was really helpful. My next hurdle kind of going after that is, well, what do I do? In Fairbanks, there's a great resource for trans and gender nonconforming people called Gender Pack. And I started going to that group, and I started meeting other people that had experiences similar to mine and did not feel nearly so alone. Hayden and Rebecca, who've kind of led that group, are two people that are just so special to me. I think that they've really made a path and a way for so many people in this area where I live to just be themselves and to have access to resources and to other people like them. Can't imagine, if I didn't have that resource. After coming out, probably the toughest thing I dealt with after that was my parents. It was an email. I was not expecting a great response. My gender had come up. I've had a few brushes with them in the past. In 9th grade, they found some makeup I had stashed and literally did everything they could to scare me straight. And the only thing I could do is basically tell them what they wanted to hear. No, I'm not gay. No, yeah, they wanted to tell me this is just a phase. I'm like, sure, this is just a phase. And it was one of the scary moments in my life. And unfortunately, if there was a lock on the closet door, they're probably the ones that put it on there. But after coming out, my life certainly got better. One of the first people I came out to was a good friend that I would go road biking with. And I came out to her and she's like, we should just start hanging out and doing stuff more. So we started going for bike rides and running and, eventually sharing holidays together. And, this is probably one of the first and best female friends I had in my life. So it really made things easier. 2015, 2016, most of it felt pretty good. Then, 2016 at the end came along, and we saw a president who was especially hostile to so many marginalized people, and trans people, weren't excluded from that. For me, it was a wake-up call to politics, I guess. Started a small group with some friends trying to get involved in activism. In 2017, I had some, queer elders approach me and say, Liz, you should run for the borough assembly. And, at that time, I had thought about it, but I think part of my apprehension was that I wasn't super publicly out. And unfortunately, still to this day, trans people are accused of, hiding or, not revealing the fact that we are trans. Later in 2017, I joined a pretty cool group called Fairbanks Ladies of Wrestling, and we had a blast doing that. Our local newspaper, they did a story about me, and it was about me being trans, and it talked about a little bit about politics and about wrestling and flow. So 2018 came along, and our borough assembly, so that's the area outside the city, there were 3 seats, and there were 2 of them that were unfilled, except for 2 people, that were conservative and, didn't really want to see things move forward in an equitable way for our town. So I talked to my friend Kathy, who ran for city council, got some help, and on the last day I filed to run for assembly. It was a whirlwind kind of experience. I had a good friend during that campaign season that completed a suicide. So I had a couple weeks where I was supposed to be campaigning and just couldn't really function. I remember what kind of restarted it was, in the funniest way, it was a radio commercial. So my friend Hayden and my friend Brenna, they came over to my cabin and we just recorded a little blurb and started things again. Eventually, I was in a race where there was probably 2 people that were sort of conservative, or definitely conservative, and there was me trying to, say at least, hey, we should at least keep things as they are and let's not make things worse. So I wound up being elected. Kathy was elected as well. Both of us, we ran. We weren't hiding that we were trans, but it never came up during the campaign. Shortly thereafter, the news got a hold of it, and it was kind of everywhere. So NBC all over the place. So I just want to say, I was really thankful, for all the support I had during that campaign time. Being in politics has been an interesting experience. And in Alaska, it's been kind of tough. In Fairbanks, where we are in the borough, we don't have any ability to do something like a non-discrimination ordinance. It's a power that's left away from us. The lawyers say, you guys can't do that unless the voters want to do that. And that's probably not something that's going to happen here. So in 2017, Kathy at our city council, went ahead and put forward a non-discrimination ordinance, which was passed, but then ultimately was vetoed by the city mayor, Jim Matherly. So it was a dark time. People were pretty sad. I think some of the closest people I count like close friends are the people that were in that city council chamber when we heard that testimony. We had some of the the most transphobic and homophobic stuff said, but we were there together for it. So that's kind of my story. I'm, grateful every day to be myself, to be visibly trans. I'm 6'4", so no matter what, I'm always pretty visible. And this is a tough time. Laura mentioned, people coming after trans youth that want to participate in sports. So to try to leave on an encouraging note, like, what do we do now? Well, we need to keep fighting for everyone to be free from this oppressive gender binary, the system that I think a lot of us have been oppressed by. We need to support people like Identity that give people the resources to live authentically And we need to push everyone in the state, the Republicans and the Democrats, to do better. I think right now we have one group that wants to make things worse and one group that's only has the ability to try to keep things from getting worse. We all gotta stick together more than ever and really do what we can to make everyone free and to give people the resources they need. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, Liz. Everyone, show your love in the chat. We have these emojis popping up. That was fantastic. Thank you so much, Liz, for your visibility and vulnerability today, and also all that you do in your community. I was, as you were telling your story, I was like, I wonder if Liz is going to mention the lady wrestling event because I want to mention it. And I was like, I'm not sure if I have consent for that, but you did. And I just want to say, Liz, badass. Like, I had the opportunity to see them in Homer. That event is so cool. So I'm so glad you mentioned that. And thank you again for sharing. All right, we have a lot of folks who've just joined in, so thank you so much for being here. Again, we have 62 people in the room, sold 70 tickets to this event, and that's just awesome. My 5-year-old niece Ida is here, so I just want to say hello with my sister Melissa and my parents. So thank you so much, family, for being here. And being so supportive of this community. Hi, Ida. All right, so we're going to move on to our next storyteller. Ptery has finally returned to Anchorage stage. After 12 years sojourn in the lower 48, Key came back out, proud and now comfortable enough to tell Kiz's story. Kiz has grown up traveling the world over as a hard of hearing queer child in a white, poor, and upwardly mobile military family. Kiz is almost 60. So please, as I put that bio in the chat, give your attention to Ptery.
Hello, good morning, good evening. Like whatever time it is, it's now. I just want to thank the Enei people for letting me be a guest on their territory. My ancestors have come from Wels in Germany. I'm the child of Jack and Barbara and the grandchild of Noel and Lucille and George and Lois. I love this land and I love that I came back. I don't know if I thought I would ever come back. I left in 2006 to go to acupuncture school. I traveled up here in 1992. I was going to be an outdoor wilderness educator. I was still in this identity of woman and lesbian, and I wanted to be an outdoor guide. And I got kind of wrapped up in some really interesting stuff, and I never did stick with that. It was just a confusing mess. I came up here and they thought I was doing work exchange to live up here instead of being a wilderness guide. So it was really funny. But I met my best friend here a year later when I went to Celebration of Change. And it was really, really good exploration for me. I really went out and I did a dance for the first time and met a lot of really amazing women who do really good art and performance. And there's a lot of different things that gave me confidence. I started working and serving in the community as a mental health consumer, although I never identified that. I'm totally, absolutely psychiatric survivor. But I served under with Jim Gottstein and worked to help advocacy for folks who've had to deal with mental illness. So it was a piece of my history. And I ended up going through different works here until I found out that I loved Chinese medicine. And I took my first course in that. And I ended up going through this whole job of going to school as a massage therapist. And that was kind of going on at the same time that me and my partner adopted my nephew and brought him up here. So I did all these really good things to bring myself into this, what do you call, stable thing. But I wasn't happy. There was something missing. And I left thinking that I needed to go be more professional. So I went off to acupuncture school. And so I was down in Seattle learning Chinese medicine, really loving it. I started learning Chinese when I was still way back in college in the early 80s. It was my first love around Chinese. It was Chinese language. And it made sense to me because it was like visual. And it was like, this is how my natural language worked, because I was hard of hearing growing up. But I just never paid attention. I always pretended I could hear, always pretended. It's like disabilities are like a thing. If you can hide it, you hide it, right? Or if you're queer and you can hide it, you hide it. It's like there's so much fear in our culture. And that's like a whole piece of white supremacy, this whole thing about you have to be perfect and fit in. And this whole thing around genetic supremacy thing, and race. It's just really a bunch of garbage, right? But so I went down to acupuncture school. And there I continued my studies with Chinese medicine, herbs, learning acupuncture points and how to feel the meridians many, many different ways. It was a really amazing learning. And I was hanging out with this older guy, and he was a mentor. He was a spiritual mentor, and like all counts of everything, he was a spiritual mentor. And he was friends with Michael Mead. I don't know if anybody knows Michael Mead. And so he had his whole relationship with men's spirituality and liberation. And he was there. He was this person in my life that really helped me have confidence. And I told him like a lot of my own stories. And he was someone that woke me up inside of me, something that was real for me of who I am. And I was doing it without, doing drugs. Pot would bring me there, but it was unsustainable because I couldn't talk on pot. Talking, it was like my extra cerebral development because I didn't start talking until I was 5. So I stayed away from pot a lot. But he was there, and he was a poet. And he was a spiritual guide. He had been running sweats for people. And like he would write a haiku every day, and post it on his phone. I mean, he was just really good. And I just fell in love with him immediately. And he was like, no, thank you. Like, because I really thought he was gay. And then I found he wasn't. It was just like all that attraction I had for him was like, we won't go there. But anyway, he became somebody I just dearly loved. I dearly loved this man. And he was straight, and he was a poet. And so I was going to acupuncture school, studying the herbs, studying the thing, getting with the body, learning all these different ways to help people feel better. And I was continuing on with my martial arts. I found somebody who taught Tai Chi on a competitive level in China, and I was studying, and I was loving that. Like there was so much stuff in there for me. And I was in a place where I had 8 other peers in my student body. And I was getting along with Asian folks for some reason. It was like they were my comrades in the class. And it's like I had spent a year and a half in the Philippines when I was an adolescent. It really shaped me. And was something I learned in that time there about how much it had shaped me that I was in a foreign country. I saw happy people the first time. As far as I got far away from the base, I saw happy people. And so there was something I learned from the Asian men that I saw, like a nonverbal level. They were comfortable with their bodies and touching each other and walking down the street with their arms around each other. They didn't have this whole weird thing in America. So it was this shaping thing coming out for me. And it was like in a second year, we was doing some work on the extraordinary meridians. And the extraordinary meridians are really interesting. They work deeper than the meridians. The meridians are on top of the body, but the inside are like deeper, more emotional, more subtle places, right? And so there's this extraordinary vessels is called the outside in, move like translation, right? And that's where I found my inner trans man, inner trans boy that was in there. And it's like all that same thing at that moment. It's like really knowing myself in this deep way, and all this pretending and pretending and pretending and pretending. I had done it all my life. Yeah, that was a piece, right? And the other side of my whole life, there's a time when I was 10 years old and we were over in Holland. I was traveling up into the mountains. I had my first spiritual experience. I was 9 or 10, and we were out there in the Alps. I swear that mountain talked to me. And it gave me the sense, it's like, you are loved. And it was no argument. And it was just felt. And I think, is that my ancestors calling? I think about that I think about that now when I look back. It was my ancestors calling me and belonging. And I didn't have a name for it or anything. And I didn't even talk to my family about anything. We didn't talk about anything. I mean, they took us through Dachau and they didn't talk about that. We didn't talk about shit. So the next thing I do, I find this New Testament and I'm reading that and thinking about God, because that's what I felt. For the next few years, I said, I'm going to stop fighting with people. I was into fighting. I really liked fighting. Especially if somebody messed with my sister, I was going to say, hey, you got to stop that shit. I punched him, we just go, right? And I stopped doing that because I thought, oh, it says to turn the other cheek and stuff. That is so much garbage. I have to tell you that justice is a body thing that has to happen somewhere. And whatever conversation that has to happen. And I'm hoping when children grow up, they have better words, right? But as a kid, it's like there was no words, you just fought. The whole thing about finding words, right? Now I'm finding words, all of that. So I started going back and then coming out. So I went through the whole thing and I found a counselor to help me with that transition thing. And she wanted me to go to they and them because maybe she saw all my really open, not literally super masculine parts of me or super feminine, maybe I'm somewhere between, It's like, no, he, if that's here, I'm not like that. I'm not arguing about that. That's just me, he. And I wasn't want to talk to them very long either. When I was 16, I had some therapists. He messed me up. I was drunk, going there and drinking. He started initiating a relationship with me. It was my first relationship. And I loved him. He brought in Taoism to me. I had no other ways. I had Christian since I was 10. And I was throwing that out away. It made no sense when my adolescence hit. And so he gave me something else. It was really powerful. And he was the first adult that listened to me. And he took advantage of me. But, 40 years later, I look back on that and it's like, oh, he's somebody who was previously homeless. He had a heroin addict going on, but he was trying to help people to stop drinking. So look out of the whole thing. It's like, well, people are really fucking interesting. They do weird shit. And I'm not interested in hanging out with anger. Anger does not really serve me, has never have saved me. So I let go of things and let go of a lot of things. And I understand things a lot more. That's because when I went to school and I went through those 2 years, and then I went through my third test that I failed in that class and I was booted out. So the next thing to know, it's like I'm homeless myself. That's not my first time. But this is the first time that I was homeless and I had support because I don't going down to Seattle. They have Tent City 3 and Tent City 4. And Nicholasville just went up. So I had a place to organize and be political with folks. And that political wasn't new for me. I started being political when I was 19. I started really seeing all the structures of Americanization, feminine, what happened in gender, meeting my first psychiatric inmate, telling me some stories in a big process here where I could hear them, what they were saying. I've been organized a long time. But this is the first time that I was seeing people who were without housing, and they were not the other anymore. So it was another 10 years that I did organizing. So I ended up down in Portland at Dignity Village. And then I was over at Hazelnut Grove. And we helped put up a Right to Dream 2. And I was a kind of a token trans person at that time in the politics. Yeah, let's put you on our grant board. We'll get more money because we have a trans person on our board, you know, and not really quite not seeing and not knowing what to do. You know, I got invited to the women's soaks after work because I was safe. Like, whoa. Anyway, it's been a long, strange trip. But see, I went down to Portland. I was there serving in Dignity Village, organizing as a right direct action down there in Portland. And then for quite a while, then I was in Hazelnut Grove. And that was the first time I was in a community that was really loose. And everybody left themselves be, right? And people would do what they needed to do in their life. But they had organization and they talked and there was a collective thing going on. And that was the first time I kind of got to be myself and be seen. Because there was another fellow that came through who was of indigenous folk. He told me stories growing up that they couldn't report and complain about shit going on. If the women were raped or the boys were raped, they couldn't complain. The next thing you know, somebody's killed and shot. And telling me his grandparents and having shit going on, massacres. In Living Remember, you have the story, you know. And then on and on and on, the story about having to go sell your body to survive. This happens on the street, you know, for my queer brothers. So more and more memory of myself wanting to live in a world that works for all people. And actually, you know, Standing Rock is happening and I'm off when I go to Standing Rock. And I'm there like 4.5 months. It's at Two Spirit Camp. And I had never seen so many brave people and loving people. Huge balls of love to go there and peaceably hold up the space that's already theirs and face all these people with guns in peaceful ways. I mean, they had to plant guns on people to go arrest people. You know, and it was there at the rivers when we were doing a ceremony to take care of the water and bless the water that I saw the water frozen again. And that called me home. The frozen creeks. And it was a long trip to get back here. And it's been a longer trip for me to be here for a couple of months, a couple of years to be settled. And start talking and saying, like, how do I organize this story? I still have this privilege for, you know, being white. You know, when I'm seen as a man, that I get kind of a lot of privileged things, but I also see people walk away from me for their own safety. And there's so much work to do to help the children, like, wake up and follow their own dreams instead of what they're told to do. Our culture is upside down, you know, and I think, you know, we got Greta going on here, you know, and I hope the young people here, you know, and other places here, it's like follow their heart, you know, and I feel my job here, how can I go help them follow their heart? And to never lose that. So I kind of feel, I'm really glad to be back here. I'm really loving the mountains. And I'm looking to walking outside again, where my feet are on the ground and I see people. And it breaks my heart because I'm still dealing with my own decolonization process of like being a white settler and seeing the pain these generations in my face. But also knowing other people are holding tight in this fucking system like this just to start making a voice and get people elected to make a chance. And I admire those people. I know I can't hold it like this anymore. I know I would scream and I want to really have like all these other weird feelings that I don't want to hurt anything. So I'm like taking care of myself so much nowadays. I'm going slow. I'm trying to stay with the group and not run off on my own like I have. But moving back into a place here that I'm going to bring back whatever medicine I have to serve this place here. Thank you. Oh, I am so sorry. I'm so sorry.
Thank you.
I'm not fucking weird. Okay.
What are you apologizing for?
Thank you. I'm
No,
apologizing.
thank you.
Time was going that fast. I have no idea. Sorry.
Oh, you're great. Thank you so much, Terry, for sharing. Everyone, show your love and appreciation for Terry's time sharing Key's experience. And yeah, you brought up some really, really valuable and important topics, such as white supremacy and the way patriarchy's oppression of gender variant folks, of indigenous populations, our colonizer bias, and how it affects our ability to see outside of ourselves, and of the importance of understanding all cultures and communities and respecting this land. When you mentioned Standing Rock specifically as well, so thank you. I did want to mention that Galaxy Note 9 had a hand raised for a moment, so if you had a question or a comment at this time, we can take it in the chat, or feel free to quickly mention what you'd like if you wanted to. If you didn't mean to raise your hand, that's fine too. We can, it happens. Thanks again, everyone, for joining us. Thank you again, Terry. And up next, we will be having actually a video recording of a storyteller.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi, I'm so sorry, guys. I just got out of an appointment. Was able to get back home. My connection's really bad. I'm gonna step outside for a sec so I can actually be able to talk to you guys. Sorry. I just wanted to say hi to everyone, and again, apologies for turning in late. I want to thank you guys for letting me in the meeting and stuff.
Absolutely. Did you have a question for Terry, or just want to say hello? We do have a set list of storytellers that we're working through right now. But if you had something you wanted to just add briefly after Terry's story, there's space for that, but we kind of need to get moving along as well.
Yes, sir. I mean, ma'am, apologies for that.
It's okay.
I can't see really well. But I can do that.
Well, thank you for saying hello. And we're going to get started on our next storyteller. If you wanted to ask a question at the end or something, you're more than welcome to. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so Raymond, pronouns he, him, his, is in his 20s. I'm actually going to go ahead and paste this in the chat first. And lives in Alaska. His many hobbies include drawing, photography, martial arts, bootblacking, chess, researching anything, playing music, writing, studying astrophysics, jewelry making, and playing Sims 4. He also loves watching movies, particularly Marvel and horror genres. Raymond loves animals and currently keeps 3 fish tanks. Oh, wow. He loves spoiling his fish and keeping them happy, even when they get small angy, when they don't get their food. Oh, that was awesome. So yeah, everyone give a warm welcome to Raymond, and we're gonna get this video playing.
Hello, my name is Raymond Lee, and I am a trans man, meaning I was assumed to be a woman based on my genitalia at birth, but I'm a man. I came out in 2011, and I've never regretted a single day, but most of those days have been hard, and not just because of my dysphoria. Transphobia has been the cause of most of my trans-related problems, so I'm going to take this time to reflect on how my experiences have taught me invaluable lessons about being transgender. So I first learned what transgender means in high school. I was previously exposed to a few trans concepts. I watched the Ace Ventura movie where it ends with the villain being a trans woman who is stripped down to her underwear in front of a bunch of male police who proceed to vomit and lament about her genitalia. I highly recommend the documentary Disclosure. It's very informative about how the media's first depictions of cross-dressing have evolved into the rampant transphobia we see today. But anyway, one day I decided I wanted to write a story. I thought I was being clever. I was going to make one character a man who only has feminine characteristics and a woman with only masculine characteristics. You know, just brand new concept, never before heard by any audience, right? So I looked up the T in LGBT. I thought it related to cross-dressing. I wanted more information. And wouldn't you know it, a ton of information, including several checklists of possible signs that someone may be transgender. And I went through those lists relating to virtually everything mentioned. And after an hour, I sat back in shock and awe, and I realized I'm transgender. I wasn't happy about it at first. I tried for months to push the idea away, but I eventually gave in, knowing that this was all I could be and that I had to face it. And the first two lessons we can pull from this is that, dear cisgender people, we trans people are taught what to think about ourselves before we get a chance to think for ourselves. We're raised with the beliefs planted into us that we don't exist, that we're sinful, or we're not to be taken seriously. And none of that reduces our transness, it only reduces our self-worth. Which brings me to the next lesson, where learning that you're trans should not be treated as the problem, it should be seen as the solution. I knew I was different my whole life, and I was just never given the help to understand why. I wish that I knew I was not only possible, but that I'm also lovable. Not just lovable to others, but that it's okay for me to love myself. I wish I had learned from cisgender people and not just from fellow trans people, but trans people are the only ones who taught me how to love myself, which also means loving my transness. The next thing I had to gather myself in terms of is dysphoria. I remember being 13 and having a monthly cycle start. I went numb and dissociated, and I don't use that clinical term lightly. What a lot of people who don't experience dysphoria don't understand is that when it comes to bodily dysphoria, literally existing in your own body is physically, or it's psychologically traumatizing. For me, I felt like I needed to escape from my body, and this manifested in so many unhealthy ways at first because, again, I didn't know I'm trans. I didn't know what to do with myself. Because of this dysphoria, I'd actually already planned a transition for myself. I had no idea what a transition was, but I had decided in high school that I was going to save up my money to get my hair cut short, to get a voluntary chest reduction, to get a hysterectomy, and somehow get a hold of steroids so I could build muscle. All along the way, on two separate occasions also, I had two classmates of mine make the comment, I just can't picture you as a girl, and one even joked that I should use the pronoun it, which for the record, I love that way more than the pronouns I grew up with, but I have to emphasize the importance of understanding dysphoria. My pronouns are he, him, his, for the record. But anyway, I have to emphasize the importance of understanding dysphoria. There is a row about whether being transgender should be considered a mental illness or not. Being transgender is not at all a mental illness. Gender dysphoria arguably is. It's imperative that you get this right because they are very different concepts. We transition to reduce and or eliminate dysphoria, but we don't get less trans in that process. Many people look to the suicide rates among trans people and believe that being trans is the cause, but it's not. Trans people are your lawyers, cab drivers, students, teachers, politicians, grocers, like so on. And gender dysphoria is hellish, but it's manageable through transition. And that's why it's recommended by doctors worldwide. And the reason our suicide rates are so high is because cisgender people shame and obstruct us from doing what we need to fix ourselves. And that traps us in that traumatizing dysphoria. This obstruction is abusive and often deadly. The lesson here is it's long overdue that cis people take us trans people seriously. It's not weird that we know more about our gender dysphoria than you ever will. Transphobes' lack of respect will never reduce our reality. It will only make our reality harsher. And so the last thing I'll talk about is healthy gender, uh, because there is such a thing as unhealthy gender. That's where toxic masculinity, toxic femininity comes from, stuff like that. It's hard for us trans people to even get a handle on how to healthily express the gender we are or aren't when the examples we're given aren't healthy for anybody. I definitely struggled with my manhood at first because of this. I had to research gender because so many people were angry with me and I never understood why. No one ever taught me anything constructive about it. Our culture has a very unhealthy fixation on gender, and most people don't realize it. Everything is gendered. If you like to sew, you're acting like a girl. If you are playing in the dirt, then you're acting like a boy. Colors, jobs, shoes, toys, haircuts, it's all gendered. And it's honestly really ridiculous because the more you try to quantify a gender, the less people qualify for that gender. This became very obvious to me the more I researched it. Before marriage equality was legalized in 2015, what was a homophobe's favorite argument against gay men in drag? Wearing a skirt and makeup, you might as well turn in your man card, like you're not a man anymore. But what's the favorite argument against trans women today? Just because you put on a dress and makeup, it doesn't make you a woman. Well, let's go a little further into that. Cisgender women bodybuilders also get hate comments. The most frequent hate comments I see of women bodybuilders are people saying, with all those muscles, you're a man. You can't be classified as a woman anymore. But what do they say about us trans guys? Just taking testosterone to build muscle doesn't make you a man. Well, how about when cisgender people dress androgynously? Transphobes love pointing out how they can't tell what gender they are as a way to demean that cis person's femininity or masculinity. But when a non-binary person expresses themselves androgynously, transphobes will complain that they're being forced to accept the ambiguity. It says a lot about how transphobes view gender when their impulse is to use it as a weapon against us. They use gender to insult and control others because our culture's contemporary view of gender is toxic. Historically, in our culture, gender was used as a moral lesson, like a real man smiles in trouble, gathers strength from distress, and grows brave by reflection, stuff like that. Today, what's the answer to being a man? Have XY chromosomes. That's it. It's a very lazy take on something that's traditionally used as a rite of passage or for maturation or wisdom. It was, dear Pinocchio, prove yourself brave, truthful, and unselfish, and someday you will be a real boy. It wasn't, dear Pinocchio, you can only be a boy if you were born with XY chromosomes, so you're screwed. Disney showed how gender is done. Don't forget about The Little Mermaid, Mulan, or Beauty and the Beast. But anyway, transphobes shoot themselves in the foot. Because if you reduce manhood to a penis, then it's easy to see why they hate us trans people. Once you take a penis out of the equation, then what do they have left for their manhood? Because the reality is that my vagina is masculine. That was very important for me to understand when I was coming out. That while I needed to change my body in some ways to eliminate dysphoria, I already have a man's body because I'm a man and this is my body. That's how it works. My masculinity isn't gained or reduced no matter how I look or how other people perceive me. Only my comfort in my body is changed, which is relevant in itself. That's why when I couldn't fit into the toxic and unrealistic gender norms, I rebelled against them because I learned that it won't kill a cisgender person if a trans person exists, but it will kill trans people if cis people won't let us exist. So my lesson to you, my trans friends, is accept that you are enough. And then go research the discrepancies of our culture's gender binary because they are endless. Transverses, like just go research the discrepancies. Broaden your understanding of gender by seeing how other cultures had more than two genders. Most cultures in history had more than two genders, and you don't need to gatekeep. Gender has never been a solid concept. It's been very complicated and fluid throughout history. Gender is very subjective, and your own gender or lack thereof is valid. It won't match someone else's, and that's valid. You are valid. The lesson is to never forget that and to keep existing because you will always be real, whether anybody else likes it or not. So Happy Trans Day of Visibility, everyone.
Yes, show all the love for Ray. Get in the comment box. Yes, you are enough. That term valid is so important. That's wonderful. So wonderful. I love the components of education throughout because that information was facts. So that was really awesome to hear. Thank you so much, Raymond, for sharing. All right, we're going to move on to our next. Looks like I had a message. Sorry. To Tate. And Tate Hanson is a 25-year-old trans masculine non-binary person who uses he, they pronouns. He has been married for 8 years to his wife, Jamie. She is also trans, and they've come out to each other in different ways during their marriage. They also have 5 fur babies, 2 dogs and 3 cats, and they are both total nerds who enjoy video games, TV shows, movies, books, and cosplaying. He is going to talk about growing up in the Mormon church, the process to accept his identity, his career as a forensic scientist, his experience getting married young, and who he is and how his wife got through some very difficult times as a couple. So everyone, please give your attention to Tate.
Hi, everyone. Wow, that was a great speech by Raymond, and definitely got me cheered up at the end there too, because he said a lot of things that resonated with me as well. I'm actually very recently out and pretty early on in my transition. I only came out in January of this year, actually, after about 2 years of exploring my gender and working through a lot of things. I was originally born in Louisiana to a Mormon family, which has a lot of similarities to what Liz said earlier about very rigid sets of gender identities. A huge tenet in the Mormon church is a document called The Family, a Proclamation to the World, and it talks about how gender is a divine right, a gift that you're given when you're born, and how whatever gender you were assigned at birth, that's how you're supposed to structure your whole life. If you're a man, you're supposed to work and provide for your family, and if you're a mother, you're supposed to stay home and nurture. And from a very young age, that didn't sit well with me. I remember as a teenager being in what they called young women's, where they would talk about temple marriage and having children, and I always knew that wasn't me. I wanted to have a career. I wanted to work. I didn't really want children. So I had all these things that just didn't quite fit in. I ended up making a lot of friends that weren't Mormon, which opened my eyes to a lot of different worldviews. But it took me a very long time to actually leave the church. My wife and I actually met in college. I went to Brigham Young University, Idaho. And I knew from the time I was about 12 that I was queer. But there's not a lot you can do when you're in that environment. And I know very well what my parents would have done if I had come out as a child, and I would have probably got sent to the bishop for, therapy to make sure I would just go back and be a good Mormon girl. And so I shut it away and I focused really hard on being a good Mormon. And that's why I went to that university. And it wasn't until my freshman year, or my first semester of my last year, my senior year, that I started talking to a fellow student who was in an internship with me. And we started talking about very deep questions that you aren't really allowed to talk about in a church setting, because people kind of give you the side eye and say, why are you questioning things? And it opened me up to so many questions I'd had about myself. I think those conversations around God and the universe and the church itself also got me thinking about my identity and who I was as a person. And when you're trying so hard to fit into this Mormon bubble, or any cultural bubble that you're raised in, that it tells you what to do and how to think. If you have those questions come up, you just bury them deep inside of you. You turn it off like a light switch if you've seen the Book of Mormon musical. And that's what I did until I had those conversations. And so that just spiraled into a whole lot of thinking. It was actually later that year that I came out as bisexual. And that was after I left the church. And it was a really rough time for me because I lost a lot of friends and had a lot of family strife, because a good chunk of my family is Mormon and my wife's family is as well. And it's very difficult leaving the church, and even more difficult coming out as queer to a church that's fought so hard against LGBT rights, and against gay marriage and trans identities. And it was a really long journey for us. So that year I left, I came out as bisexual, and the following year is when my wife came out to me as trans. There was a lot going on at once, so it was a hard time. I had moved down to Salt Lake. That was my first career job after university. I worked for a private forensics company, and it was the first time I'd been outside of Mormonism, which is really funny because I was living in Utah, which is like the center of Mormonism. But I actually was around more non-Mormons or more open-minded Mormons than ever before in my life. And I made a lot of friends that became more like family to me. I found that's a very common theme in a lot of queer people that I know and love, is that we build our own families. And there's a certain beauty to that, being able to choose who you let into your life and being able to establish those boundaries with people who don't accept you. And obviously when my wife came out as trans, it was, there's a lot of couples work we had to go through and talk about things. And I tried to be supportive as possible, but little did she know at the time that I was also thinking about my own gender around the same time. It was about the time that, we were finally free of Mormonism. I was starting to answer and think about myself a lot more. And that was when I was starting to be like, am I a girl though? I don't know. And it was kind of always like putting on a show for me. It was very much, oh, girls are supposed to wear makeup and these cute clothes and, just look cute and feminine. And so that's what I'm gonna do. But it never felt like me. I never connected to it. And it was more like I was forcing myself through these routines to fit in. And so I had all this going on inside, but I was like, it's my wife's time to shine right now. I don't know if we can handle another transition right now. So I'm just gonna put these thoughts kind of on the back burner for now. And things at my former job started getting worse. Conditions did, working for private companies can go that way. And I ended up looking for other work. And that was in December of 2018. And January 2019 is when I got offered a position at the Alaska State Crime Lab. The official name is the Scientific Crime Detection Laboratory, but that's a mouthful. And that's here in Anchorage. And I'd never been to Alaska. I didn't really know anybody in Alaska. I didn't know much about Alaska, period. And I knew it was pretty, and I knew that the job sounded great, and I needed a change. And so we moved up here in January 2019, and I've been working with that lab since. And it's a unique experience working in forensics in general. There's not a lot of queer visibility. There's not a lot of trans people. I've been to a conference or two, and it was hard getting up the nerve to actually come out at work and be visible and queer at work. But I've got to say that the response was better than I thought it would be. And people have been really accepting of me and have been doing their best to respect my pronouns and my name, which has been great. There's still an aspect to it where I do have to testify in court, and so that's going to be an experience because I have my dead name on records and stuff, and I haven't had to deal with that yet because of lockdown, but I'm not looking forward to it. So that's something that a lot of people don't realize about professional fields, is that it's kind of always going to be there for you. There's always going to be documents. There's always going to be someone. It's like I'm constantly going to have to be coming out again, and it's difficult. I mean, like I said, I'm only 2 months in, and it's already been a journey for me. But I love Alaska so far, and I love. I haven't, gotten to know the queer community as well as I would have liked. I was able to go to Pride the 1 year, and then it was lockdown. So I'm looking forward to hopefully going to some Pride events this summer and getting to know more of the queer community. I am really grateful to be here today and to hear so many amazing voices. And I think that's about it. Thank you so much.
Yay, Tate, thank you. Thank you so much for sharing. Welcome to our community, our beautiful state, and during that time that you might have to be in court, please reach out. I will speak for myself. I'm here for you. We are here for you as a community, and thank you so much for your visibility, especially in your newness to this experience. And yeah, I just really want to honor that vulnerability of sharing publicly your story when it's so fresh. So thank you so much. Okay, and right now we're actually going to have Laura come on the virtual stage to share some local resources and opportunities, which might be helpful for those who need that extra support I was just talking about during times that might become difficult, or finding community, right? Which is ultimately a bit harder right now. Pride, we will have some virtual events, so I look forward to seeing you at those as well, Tate. But Laura, thank you so much. Take it away.
Thank you so much, Goldie. So yeah, Identity has several resources, and there's also other groups in Alaska. I'm gonna just mention some things that we get a lot of requests for at Identity, and you're welcome to message me or email me. I'll put info in the chat also if you have other questions if I don't answer something that you say. But a couple of things that I wanted to give a shout out to. One is the Gender Expansive Community of Anchorage. It is open to all gender expansive Alaskans. It's a peer support group meeting bi-weekly Friday evenings, currently virtual. And Skylar, who is a facilitator with that group, is actually going to speak a little bit more on that at the end. And because I will just say, because of this COVID land, that is one of the great things, is we can have people from around Alaska. Also, Friday evenings, Choosing Our Roots they do a lot of great things, but on Friday evenings is Friday Community Chats. It's a multi-generational, that word is hard, open to the public space. So I'm going to put some of these in the chat too, some links. Liz also mentioned Gender Pack in Fairbanks. They do a lot of great work. Identity has a new, I'll call it a newish space in maybe a reworked space. It's called Family Dinner. And that is a space for caring adults who are supporting LGBTQ+ youth in their lives. And the next meeting is actually on the International Day of Transgender Day of Visibility, March 31st. That is a continuation or a growth from the peer support group that was called Transparent. Also next week, I mentioned this really briefly in my opening, but we're gonna stream the film Mama Gloria. Gloria Allen was a Black trans icon in Chicago, and this is a documentary about her life. And then also a week from today, April 3rd, will be a Q&A with Gloria, the filmmaker Lucina Fisher, and Identity board member and Native movement organizer Will Bean, who is also going to speak later. And so much. I will give a shout out to Full Spectrum Health, again, sponsor. They are a leader in gender affirming care in Alaska. Some of their services are going to be transitioning. I like using transitioning in that word, transitioning to the new Identity Health Clinic, which opened next month. Planned Parenthood offers gender affirming hormone therapy. Anchorage Pride. Also, I just want to mention, because one of the things we get a lot of questions for at Identity is financial support, especially for medical transitions or surgery. And so I'm going to put a couple of those organizations. They're national, but they might be helpful. And then we also get requests sometimes for crisis lines. So I'll put that in there too. Trans Lifeline has Spanish speakers. So if that's something that is what you need, and they are a national hotline. And Trevor Project is geared towards LGBTQ youth, and that is a great crisis line to talk to too. That was really fast. If you have any questions, you can put them in the chat. Thank you so much for this time and for being here.
Thank you so much, Laura, for sharing all of those awesome resources. Identity, has always been incredible as an entity and organization, but I've definitely seen the hard work that they put forth during this past year. They've definitely put the resiliency in, being a wonderful guiding light to the queer community, the gender variant community throughout this difficult time. I've seen it, and I've been honored to be a part of it again through this event and others. So we are going to be moving on to our next storyteller, who has a wonderful ASL interpreter joining him. And I'm going to put the bio for Will in the chat. And Will Troshynski is a musher from Two Rivers, Alaska, who lives with 27 dogs, 2 goats, and his spouse, Sean. He also happens to be a trans man who copes with depression and ADHD. He's here to talk about Iditarod, mental health, and making it to the next checkpoint. Everyone, please welcome and give your undivided attention to Will T. and Muffy.
Hi, folks. Thanks for having me. My name is Will. I'm a trans man. I use he, him pronouns. And our interpreter is Muffy Cave, who's an ASL interpreter. She uses she, her pronouns, and she's here to provide access to the deaf and hard of hearing participants. Before I begin, I do want to recognize that I live and mush sled dogs on unceded Tanana Dene land, and that the sport that I participate in, sled dog mushing, was originated by indigenous people of the Arctic regions across the world. We owe a huge debt of our knowledge of mushing to those societies who have perfected it for thousands of years. And there's a lot of work to be done within that to better serve those societies and to also better acknowledge the way that mushing has been colonized by a lot of white people, including myself. So with that, I began my social and medical transition just 2 years ago in April. My birthday is coming up here. And just 10 days ago, I actually completed my first ever Iditarod sled dog race. Both of these things were things that I had been wanting to do since I could grasp the knowledge of what they even were. When my family moved to Alaska, I immediately knew that I wanted to run the Iditarod. I told our principal, I'm going to be mushing dogs up there. And I've thought of myself as a boy since before, I call to both of these things as fundamental parts of myself. And I like dove in. I started as a teen 20 years ago mushing. I was able to learn to mush from Martin Boozer, who is a phenomenal mentor and teacher. And I got to mush with him in 2001, and it was just incredible. It was one of the best years of my life, getting to learn how to mush. And also, since I can remember, I have presented essentially as a male, while also reactively arguing that I was a girl. In 4th grade, I gave tomboy lessons to all the other girls, and I was super proud of being what I called then a tomboy. Like, I really felt an affinity with that identity. But I got older, and when you get older, there are things that come in over the top of those kinds of joys, of the joy of that pure joy of learning how to mush, and that joy of like, yeah, I'm a tomboy, this is great. you start to learn what to fear. You fall off your sled and you lose your team and realize that that's terrifying. You're told that being gay is a really bad thing and that girls aren't supposed to be tomboys. You start to worry and you learn how you can let people down by following those things that give you joy. And by not like doing good enough, by not being what people expect. Um, so there's this idea, I was brought up Catholic, and there's an idea, at least there, that you can't run from God. I don't know about God, but what I do know is that you really can't hide from yourself, from your identity, or from those fundamental pieces of who you are, your own essence. You just can't run from that forever. Um, I was terrified of the world knowing that I was trans. I was terrified of running the Iditarod. Both of those things were pretty scary to me. I was so terrified that I ran from it. I left Alaska. I identified as gay. That seemed like a good safe zone. Like it was like, partial truth. Um, it was a way to kind of stay away from my full story. But both of those parts of me kept knocking and knocking at the door. So when I reached the starting line of Iditarod, finally, just a few weeks ago, after 20 years of trying to get there, running away from getting there, finally getting there, I was so scared. I was out of myself scared. I was so scared I almost didn't have any I almost didn't have any sense of where I was or what I was doing. The challenge of Iditarod had loomed over me for 20 years. It is renowned as the longest, and some people say the toughest sled dog race. I had been surrounded by people telling me stories that sounded, terrifying. Like there are fewer people who have finished the Iditarod than have climbed Mount Everest, and there's a reason for that. It's really tough. Even this year, there were some changes due to COVID. And even with that, the major challenges of the technical driving and the extreme weather were there. But with all of that, the biggest thing for me, like for many people, was the mental challenge. So in the Iditarod, you're out in the wilderness in the cold with you and only your 14 dogs for at least 9 days. You might be out there for longer. Not only are you navigating all of that tricky terrain, but you're solely responsible for your team. You have to care for them, you have to guide them, feed them, protect them, not let go of the sled, and you're doing all of that on almost no sleep. Um, and then being in the cold and doing that with little to no sleep for days on end, it takes its toll. The dogs actually tend to get stronger through the race because they're getting into a rhythm where they're doing what they are attuned for. It's like an ancient way of traveling that they just lock into and become it's amazing what happens to their bodies and they just become this amazing group, this pack of wolves traveling as they're sort of meant to do deep down in their genes. Humans hanging onto the back of the sled are like Babe the pig trying to be a sheepdog. I think that's what happens in that story. I actually never watched that movie. Basically, it's all we can do to keep up, though. And then while you're out there, you're trying to do a tenth of what your dogs can do. You have a lot of time to think, and you end up facing yourself. I have struggled with depression and anxiety for my whole life. I was super recently diagnosed with ADHD, which really explained a lot of things. I was prepared to meet some demons out there. I was like ready to do battle, and I've been hearing about the way you meet yourself on Iditarod for so long. The thing that I was the most scared of and what I was expecting to face out there was that I didn't like mushing anymore. I'd like fallen out of love with this thing that had been so fundamental to me and so essential to me. And that I had also spent so much of myself on, money, of course, but just this time, energy, how much my spouse had given to make this happen. At this point, we had had our own kennel for 3 years and we'd raised puppies, and there was so much of me put into this. And I was terrified that I was going to get out there and realize that I just didn't love it anymore. And that's actually weirdly what it also felt like when I started doing my medical transition. I had so many doubts that the world had kind of handed me. Did I know what I wanted? What if I began the process of medically transitioning and realized it was a mistake? What if, like, was that process even worth the hardship of basically becoming a conflict to anybody I ran into, a contradiction of some of their own set beliefs? My journey was like really confusing as well because I also didn't experience dysphoria the way I had heard it described. Um, I kept thinking, well, I don't fit this. I'm not quite right for it, so I shouldn't do it. Then I heard somebody talk about the idea of gender euphoria, which is the idea that after medical or social transition, one might feel this sense of like rightness with themselves. And I imagined myself post top surgery and post social transition, and there was this tiny inkling of joy, and that I just felt at that it was like this little sunburst, and I finally decided to take the leap. And of course, it was longer, more complicated than that, but I started, and even then, I was still scared. What if I wasn't right? And then came the day I did my very first shot, my first tee shot. And you don't like do your first shot and immediately changes start happening. But for whatever reason, that was such a mile marker for me that that day, that moment sitting in the bathroom was this revelation. I felt nothing but right. It was like I was suddenly in tune and I knew exactly where I was supposed to be going. It was like I had been wandering around in the woods and then all of a sudden I was on the right path. Even just talking about it right now, I'm getting chills. Um, it was this huge sense of relief that came over me with just that one shot. And it was like, oh my God, here I am. Um, so the first run of Iditarod, the first like leg of it, when we got going, because you break it into many runs. That first leg was I was just like worried about what people are gonna think. We were getting passed by other teams. It was a really hot day. My dogs are used to the colder weather up here where we live, and so they were kind of sluggish and slow. And I was carrying that expectation that this experience, that the next 10 days were going to be just suffering, and that I was going to hate it, and that I was going to, you know, come out of it knowing that I just didn't like mushing anymore. But I was determined to complete it because I'd made a commitment. And so I was just sort of bracing myself um, to confirm that I had, I was out of love with the one thing I had been drawn to over and over again, that it just wasn't even part of me anymore. So we climb up into the first part of the Alaska Range, which is trails I had been on before. And we went to the checkpoint of Finger Lake. And we left the checkpoint of Finger Lake right in the middle of the day. And what happens when you leave that checkpoint is you kind of ping pong through this little trail of trees. And then you drop onto a river or a lake or a pond. And on the water, on the ice, you look up and there are mountains everywhere. And the moment that the runners landed on the ice and that I looked up, I saw the Alaska Range all around me, and I was there. And my dogs, who are this amazing group, incidentally, they're all female dogs, which is a weird side note, but all these girl dogs looked back at me and they just smiled with their tongues out and that light in their eyes. And most of these dogs I'd raised from pups, like these are my legitimately best friends. They're looking back at me and they're wagging their tails and they have big dog grins on and they're saying, "Oh, there you are. We have been waiting for you." And I looked at them and I looked at the wilderness that was opening up around me. And I remembered in just that 1 second the entire reason why I mushed. The reason that this lifestyle and that this particular race have been calling me year after year, even when I tried to run, no matter how far I tried to get away from it. And that's what it felt like that first day of taking tea. It was like I had turned a corner and there I was. And not in that way where I was opposed to myself or fighting myself, but in a way where it was like I saw my entire self as I should be, as I was. I'm 2 years into my medical transition now. My face is changing. My chest looks like me. I'm finally growing a beard. I swear it's there. When I look in the mirror, I recognize myself. I can smile at me. Um, the worry and the fear about what other people think about who I am, that's worn away so much. It just can't stand up against that utter euphoric joy of being myself. Um, it can't stand up against being in tune with that. So I completed the Iditarod just last Wednesday. It was 10 days ago. I was third from last, and which is not where I hoped to be. But I didn't care at that point. It didn't matter at all. When I pulled into the finish lines, my dogs were happy. They had these huge smiles on their faces. They were barking and wagging their tails. They were proud of themselves. They definitely wanted to keep going. I had taken good care of them down the trail, and we had traveled in a world that, like, most people have never seen, and we'd done it together as a team, and not just them together as a team, but me, like, whole as a team with them. The utter euphoria of doing that eroded the fear that my brain had, like, built into place. When I look back at our race, I don't think of the scary parts. There were scary parts, don't get me wrong. um, I think about the way that it felt to come out of those trees and see the mountains of the Alaska range. I think about the smiles on my dog's faces as I feed them snacks and that they bark to keep going. It's that feeling of trust between them and me, and the trust between myself and myself knowing who I am. Um, the world is really good at trying to convince us of doubts and fears. I think that sometimes if we close our eyes and take a leap, we can find the euphoria and maybe find ourselves on the other side. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Will. And thank you so much to Muffy, too, for sharing that wonderful story. It's inspiring. A lot of us could relate to it because we've grown up around the Iditarod, or hearing stories of the Iditarod, but also from a lens that doesn't always include a trans experience, such as yours. And thank you so much for joining us amongst your busy schedule. We've been in contact with Will, for some time now, so I'm amazed that you were able to squeeze us in, and we're so glad you could. And thank you for your visibility outside of this space too, of being someone who is trans and also doing the Iditarod. It's amazing. New frontiers. All right. Well, we have another storyteller who submitted a video. I'm going to share their bio in the chat and be sharing their video here in a moment. But CJ Levine identifies as a trans man, and his pronouns are he, him, his. He has worked in education for most of his life, both in and out of a traditional classroom. CJ moved to Alaska in 2014, where he's worked as a teacher for the lower Kushkamwim School District and the Kenai Peninsula Borough School District. And so now I will be sharing the video. Please give CJ your attention.
Hey folks, my name is CJ Levine. The story that I'm going to share with you today takes place in March of 2012. The setting is a middle school classroom on the East Coast, and at the time I am 2 months into a long-term substitute teaching position teaching science to 6th, 7th, and 8th graders. This particular day, this particular class period is my 8th graders, and we are doing a sort of review on genetics. I say sort of because the kids have had a fair number of teachers in the last couple of years. I'm not 100% certain they got this material originally, but it's something that they need to know because the state standardized test that takes place next month in April will cover the material. So anyway, we're talking genetics, and we talk about DNA and chromosomes. We spend a lot of time talking about dominant and recessive traits. Towards the end of the lesson, one of my students raises their hand and says, "Mr. Levine, what makes a person a boy or a girl?" I pause for a moment. The kids can't see it, but my heart speeds up a little bit. Well, I tell them the sex of a person is determined by whether they have 2 X chromosomes or an X and a Y chromosome. If a person has 2 X chromosomes, we say they are female, and if a person has an X and a Y chromosome, we say that that person is male. At this point, one of my students comes to the realization that that means that it's her father's fault that she's a girl, since someone with 2 X chromosomes could only contribute an X chromosome. Much giggles all over the place. Life is fine. I'm hoping, as much as the kids are enjoying this topic, that I can redirect them before we stumble onto a question that I'm not sure I'm ready to talk about in this setting. But one of my kids raises their hands, I see their face, and I know immediately I'm not going to be that fortunate today. I call on the student, and the student says, "Mr. Levine, if your genes say whether you're a boy or a girl, then what is a hermaphrodite?" I take a moment and I say that, well, it depends on what you mean by the term. Strictly speaking, a true hermaphrodite is an organism that has the sex organs of both functioning sex organs of both a male and a female, and that's just not possible in humans. Another student chimes in with, "I think she," referring to the first student, "meant a transsexual." And before I can even say anything, a third student chimes in with, "You mean a he, she?" And the first student replies, "Yeah, that." Again, I haven't had a chance to say anything, and a fourth student says, "What about someone who is transgender?" I had to raise my hands for silence to get their attention back. Again, I'm very pleased that they are asking these questions, but I need a moment, and I need to get some control back in my classroom. So I asked them, "Before we talk about those terms, I need to explain something to you. If I say the words sex and gender, do you think they mean the same thing?" All the kids in the room pretty much start nodding immediately, but you can see some of them are thinking, because I have to have a reason for asking this question. So I continue and explain that a person's sex is their physical appearance, and the gender is how they perceive themselves. And for most people, those are the same thing. But a transgender person is someone who thinks of themselves differently than the body they have. A lot of confused looks. One student outright says, "What do you mean?" Imagine for a moment, I tell them, that you had been born with the body of the opposite sex. So, for example, let's say Danielle, not her real name, but the first student that had spoken up, had been born in a boy's body. Now, Danielle knows that she is a girl, but because of how her body looks, she is raised as a boy. That is a transgender person. Another student chimes in, "Well, what's a transsexual person then?" Coming to that, I say a transsexual is a transgender person who undergoes medical treatment to make their body look different. You mean like surgery? Immediate chorus of ews and grosses and just general disbelief. But one student asks the all-important question, why would someone do that? Well, I tell them, think about it and remember that example. How do you think it would feel if you know something, but everybody around you is constantly telling you something else? You're singled out, you're teased, you're bullied. It happens to you every day, and it affects how you feel, and it affects the things you're allowed to do. Now, Danielle, the girl that asked the question that kicked this whole conversation off, looks really thoughtful for about 10 seconds, and then says quite loudly and vehemently, "That would suck." The conversation continued beyond that, but by that point, it had turned. It was no longer kids asking for information. It was them asking how to help somebody who might be experiencing these feelings. The reason I got so nervous when the kids asked me those questions, and the reason that I almost didn't let that conversation happen, is because I am transgender. I was assigned female at birth. Nobody in that school knew. There's a part 2 to this story. About 4 years after that march, I was back in my hometown to visit during the course of the summer. By this point, I had moved up here to Alaska. I was not out to my students, but I was out to many of my coworkers. I was in a much more comfortable place. During my visit to the hometown, I learned that the school district where that classroom was located was considering an updated non-discrimination policy that would allow for protections for students who did not identify as the gender marked on their birth certificate, and for students who identified as something other than heterosexual. The board would be hearing public testimony in favor of or against this piece of proposed legislation. I thought about it for a moment, and then I signed up to present to the board. And I gave a very short version of the story that I just related here. What I did not realize at the time that I was speaking to the board, it was a very crowded board meeting that night, there were a lot of people there for several different issues, was some of my former coworkers were in the crowd. After I spoke, I stepped back out into the hallway outside the meeting room and took a moment to center myself again, because it had been a very stressful thing to do. And one of my former coworkers came out. As I said, I had not realized that she was there. She came over to me and said, "I apologize if I ever said anything to you that made you uncomfortable. Thank you for working with our students through that. And please give me some resources so that I can be a better ally."
Thank you, CJ, for sharing that story. It was wonderful. It's so incredible to stand in front of a classroom of young people who are using such terms and referring to your identity in that way, and to still stand up there and have that courage to answer those questions and have that hard conversation. That's a beautiful part of visibility that is so important, and not everyone has the safety to do so. Not everyone has, the support systems to do so. And so we all benefit from your courage, CJ, and from the courage of the group here today who are showing such visibility for the community at large, who aren't always able to have that representation, or don't always want to, everyone has their own experience in that. So thank you. we're going to move on to our final story. And it's really exciting because we have several folks who are joining together for this. Why is this not? Okay, I'm not sure. One moment. Okay. Sorry, technical difficulties. Okay, well, I'm not able to highlight them or spotlight them. So just we'll have the entire room present, which is fine. But please welcome Will and Enei and Aqpik, who are going to be sharing a story. These are folks from the incredible organization Native Movement. We love them so much. They do incredible work in our community. So thankful for them, and enjoy their story. Thank you.
Oops, where's our leader?
Will, are you still with us?
Oh, did Will fall? Oh, I see Will.
Can't quite hear you yet, Will.
Okay, there we go. Can you hear me now?
Yay.
So we are going to be reading a story from St. Lawrence Island Legends 2, developed by the staff of the National Bilingual Materials Development Center, Rural Education Affairs from University of Alaska, called The Strange Man and His Whale. And I guess I'll let Aqpik start us off.
Diana. So again, this is a story from St. Lawrence Island. And, one of the intentions of sharing this is to show how we have many genders in many of our cultures. For us, in the Inuit belief, there is another sex between man and woman. In other places, they might be referred to as people with dual sex characteristics. But Inuit here in this area of Siberia in St. Lawrence Island have great consideration for this kind of person because he can't help his nature. We look at this mostly in the way a person dresses and not in the way he acts. When a person with a mustache is dressed like a woman, we are careful not to make fun of him as instructed by our elders. The elders would say that such people were protected by the maker of all. So to laugh at him would bring a curse to the thoughtless ones. So when we see a man dressed like a woman, he is showing respect to his culture, and we are not to laugh at him or hurt his feelings. So there was one like that in this story. The man in this story dressed like a woman and never wanted to go hunting, but stayed home and sewed. He was the eldest of 4 brothers. It happened that the younger men, when they got whales and walruses out in the ice and sea, would get upset that meat taken to the eldest brother who didn't go hunting at all. The younger brothers would complain, "Why do we have to take meat to our eldest brother when he doesn't work out in the cold, moving ice and sea like us?" When the strange acting man heard about this, he went out to the shore. He buried his face in his parky sleeves and the large ruff which were made like women's clothing, and cried because the brothers hurt his feelings. There he cried and cried. Soon a voice was heard asking,
Why is this woman crying?
It was the voice of the maker of all. In answer, the strange man said,
My brothers complained about me not being out on the ice and sea with them at the hunts. I am unable to go. I can't. I'm like a woman. How can I when I meet like this?
He sobbed on as he poured out his grief. So the voice answered,
All right, I'll see to it that you'll get something.
So very much comforted, the strange man went home. It wasn't long when he felt that he was getting big like a woman that was going to have a baby. He got bigger. Boy, the poor strange man was frightened.
If I'm going to have a baby, how will it ever be delivered?
He moaned to himself, but the voice soon talked to him again, asking,
Why is the woman crying again?
For an answer, the strange man asked,
If I'm going to have a baby, how is it going to be delivered?
You go down to the sea and bury your face in your sleeves and ruff and rest there on the sea. You won't sink.
the voice answered. So the strange man hurried down to the sea in his parkie made of that like a woman's, and got on the sea and buried his face with his sleeves and large ruff made of black dog skin. This was the woman's original parkie. There he floated around as he cried. Somehow a little whale was born. When his baby was born, it was not like the humans. Instead, it was a little whale. The strange man picked up the tiny whale and took it home. He loved it so dearly that he carved a large wooden bowl and put water in it for the whale to swim in. The whale was getting big fast, so that in no time he had to carve another bowl. When the whale got too large to be kept in the house, the man took him to the sea. He stayed at the waves for some time. While he was at the waves, the little whale would come ashore many times to be with his mother. When he was grown up, the strange man made a marker for his son. He made holes at his nose and put a reddened baby seal skin on his nose to mark him. So when the little whale would play out in the sea, there were times when he got as far as the horizon. He got to going so far away that he would bring another whale along when he came home. So the younger brothers of the strange man would go out and kill the one he brought. He brought home many whales, and the brothers were getting rich. The people of the village also became good whalers because of the whales which followed the man's special whale given him by the maker of all. They were not short of meat and oil. They had plenty of bones for housing poles and for other uses. That was the way the strange man was comforted. Then one day, his whale didn't come home. The strange man waited at the shore very anxiously, and he was very worried. He waited and waited, but no whale came. Another day passed on, still no sign of his whale. Then he finally got into his parkie and buried his face in his sleeves in the large ruff and cried. He cried, and soon he heard a voice asking to know why the woman was crying. The strange man poured out his sorrow in answer, so the voice said to him,
You go out to the sea in your parkie, as you always do, until you stop, but you will still be moving.
The man did as he was told. Out there on the ocean, he moved along, but he did not see where he was going. When he stopped moving, he got his head up from his parkie, and what a strange place he was coming to. Where was he? The strange man wondered and tried to figure it out. Soon he found out that he was coming to a different village. As soon as he came to the coast, he skipped along to the shore. He walked up to the beach. At the beach, what tragedy met his eyes? There was the marked head of his son. Just the head. Where was his body? In vain, he ran around the large head to see the body. but it was gone. His son was killed. He could see that there was a village close by. He followed the path to a house. When he got there, he found out that it was the home of a crew that had got his son. The people were getting together there to tell stories to celebrate the event or honor the catch. The people humbly welcomed the strange man and asked if he had a story to tell, as they were doing this to show their thankfulness for a great event that had been given to them. The strange man replied,
I am coming to tell you a story, for I certainly have one.
He
There's a
started,
man who was born to be unable to go hunting for whales and all animals like others do. When he was accused, he cried to the maker of all, and he was given a strange and powerful son, a whale. What a heart lifter he was. He got many whales for the village, so the man or his parent was not helpless anymore. Very proudly, he raised his son. He was a joy to him. So he put a marker on him, a beautiful piece of work on him, a reddened baby sealskin of great prize. To the parents' great sorrow, however, his son was killed when the poor ambitious child got too far from home. They should have left him alone as he had markings, but they have killed him anyway. This is a tragedy to his parent. That is my story.
with this, the sorrowing mother left the place in tears. There was a terrible silence after he left. The people tried to understand what he meant, and they thought about killing a whale with reddened skins on his nose. A terrible and horrible thing happened after the strange man left the place. The crew of the boat that had killed the whale with the reddened baby sealskin on his nose started to sweat. The men sweated and sweated. Terrified by their appearance, the men looked at each other. They got smaller and smaller until they all turned to liquid. They say that every time someone got a seal or some other animal which looked strange, usually some sorrow would come to the family that happened to get it. I guess this is because that animal was marked as belonging to someone and that it should never have been killed. And the backgrounds that Enei and I have is artwork done by Amber Webb. And after hearing this story, Amber Webb, who is Alaska Native, she's Aqpik, I believe, she created this beautiful artwork to illustrate the story that she heard. And so that's the background. I just want to acknowledge the artwork.
Mom, can I see your...
And I don't know if Will, you wanted to share about the story, but we've been sharing this story and having discussions within our own communities about gender and our cultural understandings of gender beyond the binary, and so this is just one of Native stories that include, and unfortunately many of our stories that we might have more of from different cultures maybe have been lost due to colonization, right? But we're on this beautiful journey of resurgence of our stories and of our gender identities.
Yeah, so if we haven't met before, my name is Will Kusiq. I identify as indigiqueer, but I guess a little bit more about that is it's a newer, more modern, contemporary term as opposed to two-spirit. And so I'm a genderqueer homosexual, and so I've been on hormone therapy since last June, and kind of just seeing where it goes and what I feel comfortable with. And I actually just learned about this story last fall during Elders and Youth Conference from one of our coworkers, Nasaluk, where Enei, Nasaluk, and I also read the story and held a discussion about it. And it was just so incredibly just uplifting, and just made my heart so glad to hear a traditional story from Alaska about other gendered people, as it's been something that I've been searching for ever since I learned the term not gender non-binary. And I'm very glad to be here with Aqpik and Enei to share the story with you all tonight. Thank you. Hoi Aqpik.
Thank you so much, endlessly. Definitely the presentation of that story and the story itself got me really emotional. It was just really beautiful to see a group of people come together and share a story together, reading the parts of who is of the story. It's just, it really touched me. I think it touched a lot of us. So thank you endlessly for that. That is our final story and presentation performance of this event. We do have some closing remarks by the incredible Skylar, who is a part of the leadership of our gender expansive community, which is an organized, group of people who meet weekly or bi-weekly. Sorry, I'm not sure how often. You'll have more information on that. I apologize. I hate to do so, but I actually have to leave. I have an engagement in which I need to run off to. And we're just a bit over time that I was expecting. So I have to bounce out. And I just wanted to say before I go, I'm so appreciative for this group. I'm so appreciative for our Alaska LGBTQ2+ queer and gender variant community, and for all of you having the visibility and vulnerability today. You inspire me every day to be more authentic to myself. And so I just honor you all and thank you all very much. Have a wonderful rest of your time. I have to go. Bye.
All right. Well, yeah, thanks, Brooks, thank you, Brooks, for allowing Golden Delicious to host for us. And thank you, Golden, for giving us Brooks to be part of our planning committee. Yeah, my name's Skylar. I'm one of the co-facilitators for the Gender Expansive Community of Anchorage. We are a group that meets bi-weekly. If you are a gender expansive person, that means transgender, that means non-binary, that means genderqueer, that means any sort of expanded form of understanding gender, because there are so many out there. And why do we need more? Why do we need to get out of one box to go in another one? So that, yeah, if you identify as part of that group, please check out our portion on Identity's website and maybe join us sometime. So yeah, I'd like to thank all of the planning committee who helped me. Helped me. They did a lot of the work, more than I did. I'd like to thank Oliver for organizing yet another wonderful Transcending Tales speaking event. He has organized many of them, and this is yet another great one. I'd like to again thank Brooks for being a part of it. Will, Charlie, Laura, anyone else I'm forgetting? Thank you all. It's been really wonderful to have a group of people come together to work together to honor visibility. Visibility is really important. And so I've got a few closing remarks on this. So trans visibility is always a double-edged sword. I always think of this day as the contrast to the Transgender Day of Remembrance, which is our memorial ceremony for gender expansive people who have died due to violence in the past year. And for some people, that is the direct result of visibility, violence. But we are not people who go quietly, and we have been more visible than ever lately. From popular actors and musicians coming out to political organization and forcing media and news to take notice where they never did before, that's the other side of visibility. We're grabbing the spotlight and forcing it to shine more equally. The other edge of visibility is what we use to make room for ourselves. I'm fairly young, so I don't get to say this often, but I have seen such a drastic change in my lifetime. I can't really believe it. When I started transitioning, we were a footnote at best, a ready joke that no one would complain about, a punching bag for bad comedy and melodrama alike. But now we have demanded the respect of human beings, and others have recognized our right to that as well. When we are hurt, oppressed, silenced, we now have others who join us in saying, that is not right. And more than that, we get to show the positives, and others will celebrate with us. We are fully realized people with amazing talents, from those actors and musicians to carpenters, cooks, comedians, streamers, artists. I used to not be able to name a single out trans person who was famous for doing anything besides being trans. Now I run out of fingers, and I've run out of toes. Are there people out there trying to stamp us down to force us back into hiding? Of course. But every day is a chance to show them all of the ways they have already lost that fight. And they have. Sure, progress is sometimes slow, but it will be when you're moving the public opinion of millions by hand. The thing is, when you've got this much momentum, you just can't stop us. So thank you all for coming. Thank you all for joining us. Again, thank you to the Dena'ina people for stewarding this land and allowing us to be here and have this wonderful event from their land. And thank you to everyone who spoke as part of this event, and especially to the audience for joining us in celebrating visibility in all its forms.